Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 21st Century Business Forum. I'm your host, Clay Young. This morning, we are excited to have with us Paylocity CEO Steve Beauchamp, who routinely ranks among Glassdoor's top 100 CEOs in the nation, and the company is among Fortune's top 10 fastest growing companies in the world, valued at just under $9 billion. Steve has been with the HR and payroll software company since 2007, having taken it public in 2014. Now, anticipated 2022 revenues are $795 million, up an amazing 25% from this year. Steve, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. Steve, I want to begin with at the beginning, obviously, when you got with the company, you had about 100 employees. Now you've got nearly 4,100 and 30,000 clients. That is incredible. How has that journey gone? And talk me through the beginning to where you are now.
Yeah, it's been a great journey, obviously. Just, not just professionally, but personally been very rewarding to see so many people grow with the company and take on new responsibilities and jobs. We really had a lot of success in the Chicagoland area, and we took that model and we expanded it nationwide, kind of market by market, adding customer by customer, really with a simple concept. If we can make one customer happy, then we can use them as a reference and sell to the next customer. And at the same time, we just really invested a lot in the software to create great user experience. And so when you combine the same idea of great service and some really functional and easy to use software, it's kind of been the formula to success. And it's been, I think, super rewarding for me as the CEO. I've certainly seen a lot of change and development in the company with this type of growth and scale. But I still think in many ways, we're still trying to accomplish the same thing for our clients that we were 14 years ago when I started.
Well, let me ask you, linearly, and there's an old saying that the secret to success is there is no secret. It's just hard work. But you have to be disciplined to stay the course. So how did you maintain your discipline, product discipline, the science of how you run your company? How'd you keep that discipline?
Yeah, so I think it starts by listening to your customers and listening to your team. I think lots of times people make the mistake where they've got a plan and it's a 2 or 3 year plan, and you kind of continue to run that playbook and you're not nimble enough to react to the feedback that you get. And honestly, that feedback's readily available from customers and from your team of people that are talking to the customers on an ongoing basis, whether they're going to be in sales or they're servicing customers or helping customers with a new module. And so we've really had good cycles of feedback on an ongoing basis. And I can think of, countless examples over the last 14 years where we've had to make pretty sizable pivots over time and maybe reprioritize what we're working on or try a new idea, or maybe actually spend some time on something that wasn't working in the past and shift and change. And I think being nimble and entrepreneurial spirit is really important when you're in that growth phase.
It's amazing to think about that. That's one of the great things that I have the honor of doing and talking with CEOs and hearing their stories and learning about their journeys and moving along the way. What do you think defines a great workplace?
Yeah, I think there's lots of definitions around what a great workplace can be, but I think it ultimately comes down to the simple idea that employees they're engaged, they're excited about what they do. I always use kind of the simple example. What do my employees say when they go to the family barbecue on the weekend about their job? Is it, hey, what do you do for a living? And it's, I work for company XYZ. Or, hey, I'm with this company and this is what we're doing. And I'm kind of excited about what's happening. And I think if you make it really simple like that and you focus on, okay, now what are the things that we can do to make sure they understand the impact that they have? They understand the career options that they have in front of you. We celebrate the wins that we have as an organization and as individuals along the way. That to me is what the secret of making it really fun place to work and getting the engagement level you need from the team. Now, it's complicated to do that. That sounds really simple, but there's a lot that really goes into it. So I would say spend time with the employees, listen to the feedback, and make that a priority to actually drive meaningful changes across the organization to make sure that you can keep it or create a great place to work.
Well, let me ask you this as a follow-up to that. We spoke with Todd Graves, who's a good friend of mine, and he's been masterful at what he's done with Raising Cane's, and he's been able to duplicate the culture in all of his restaurants. No matter where you are around the country, the culture is the same, the attitude, the vibe, all of that is the same. When you manage 4,100 employees and you've got 30,000 clients, you have to have a black box of what your culture is going to be.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, and how do you duplicate it to make sure you're consistent wherever you are?
Sure. So I think early on, as you're growing, a lot of the culture has to get driven by the leaders and consistent behavior by the leaders, constant communication, listening sessions with frontline folks that are talking to customers, getting in front of salespeople, and really making yourself really readily available. That also gives you appreciation for what the challenges are and what the business. And then as you scale, I, as the CEO, am certainly the champion of the culture, but I need to engage a much broader team to make that culture come alive on an ongoing basis so that in the example you gave, it can be replicated by location by location. And so we are really, I would say we're become more formal about what our values are and how those values kind of get embedded in everyday life. So think next generation from an innovation perspective, be unbeatable together from a team orientation, live the reputation where it's honesty and integrity and transparency is a core part of the values. And so I think as organizations grow and scale, you have to become a little bit more formalized, but you're just being more formalized about the same things that were important to you when you were really small. And then you're trying to get engagement from the employees in those values, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to hold each other accountable. They're going to make them come alive, and they're going to be living it every day. And the more people that you have that get excited about that and engage with it, the easier it is to maintain your culture as you grow and scale.
Oh, wow. So well said. You've talked also about your teams, and that they shouldn't think about the pandemic as something that's going to be over with in a month or 2 months, but that they should prepare to be working remotely forever. What do you mean by that? And what's the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, so I think we were all trying to figure out how long this was going to last early on. And so many times we thought it's going to be better in a month or two or 3 or 4 months. And then, okay, here we go down the cycle of change. And really, still today, most of the employees you survey would rather have either a hybrid, meaning a meaningful amount of time working from home, or work from home on a permanent basis, particularly in kind of white collar environments. And so I think, what was obvious to me early on was that this was going to have a fundamental change to how people work on an ongoing basis. And I kind of really compare it to almost the Industrial Revolution, where everyone started working in manufacturing environments, and it really shifted the way people work and what was important to them. And the idea of being able to have some flexibility to work from home, to be home when your kids get off the bus or whatever that scenario is, avoid the commute, which is big for folks, that was going to last forever in some format that we didn't actually have to predict. It didn't matter how much of that was going to happen. What mattered is we had to get good at this remote interaction. And that became clear. And so what I said to the team is reimagine all the things we do: onboarding a new hire, celebrating promotions, team meetings, and reimagine that we're not just doing this for the next 3 to 6 months, but imagine that we're doing this for years to come. And that actually changes the importance of how you approach those things. And you're not trying to put band-aid solutions in, but you're really trying to create a longer term environment. And my theory was, if we're all back in the office in 6 to 12 months, we've probably learned a ton from that exercise, and we haven't just done it on a temporary basis. And if it lasts longer, and or people want to work a different way for a long period of time, we're going to be in much better shape. And I think that has served us well.
Steve, don't you think we've been able to, as a country, find efficiency in what we have done based upon the pandemic? As you say, working remotely, finding ways to maximize the hours you get during the day. In many ways, it's been kind of a treasure inside of all of this chaos, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. There's no question we found efficiencies. I'm in the office 2 or 3 days a week, but I've lost nearly 2 hours in a commute time, and that's some efficiency that I've gained. And some of that goes into work, and some of it goes into personal time. And I think a lot of our people have found different ways to work, less meetings with more people. But on the flip side, the thing that I worry about, and I think we got to pay attention to, is there's always unintended consequences that come with these benefits. And so you look at something like, the idea of the online meeting, the Zoom fatigue that people like to talk about, and the idea that people aren't necessarily getting as much personal connections with maybe their team or their manager. And then you see people much more comfortable moving jobs, or are they getting connected to what that company's really trying to do? So there's unintended consequences of this that I think can be managed, but they definitely have to be managed. So in my opinion, all of this kind of fast forward several years, I think will be a net positive for society, just from a productivity and kind of an overall happiness. But I don't think it's going to be a straight line there. And I think organizations are going to have to shift and change and pay attention to some things that they probably just didn't pay attention to as much prior.
To that point, a lot of companies are struggling with managing success with remote team meetings and all of the activities that have happened there. You guys have done some creative things with remote events for employees to overcome that Zoom fatigue you just mentioned and to keep the connection. What have you done? Talk about that.
Yeah, I think we've done a number of things. So I put them into different categories. So the first category is, how do you create these kind of personal and human connections in ways
Yeah.
that you would just get water cooler conversations in the office and so on. And so one of the things that we've done there is, okay, some of the stuff you've seen other companies doing, certainly the happy hours and the getting together groups, but we've also have like social connection areas in our application where people can actually go and talk about things that are important to them. So we've got like a dad jokes group. So if you think of the things you would normally do in the office, you've got to try to find a way to recreate those online. You give prizes, you create events around that. Last year, we did a talent show where employees submitted to their talent. We couldn't actually do this at home. We had somebody who was fire breathing. We had people who were singing. We had people who were dancing and doing performances. And so like, that's something that we actually couldn't have done here. And so we've tried to really get the creativity of the employees going and find different ways to be able to connect. And I think the second category is like, how do we make work a little bit different? And so instead of having an hour meeting with 20 people, do you record a video that's 10 or 15-minute video and you only have the meeting for half an hour? Do you schedule breaks in between meetings so that you're not always going kind of on a back-to-back basis? Are you spending more time writing? Right. And so in our product, you can have discussions in the product and be able to take things asynchronously instead of always being completely online. And one of the things people don't think about is your face is right there in the camera all the time. Right. In some ways, it's a more intense experience than sitting in a conference room with 12 people. And so I think, again, I go back to think of the things that happen to the office, reimagine those for a remote way, and don't just do the same things. Try some different approaches towards it.
Well, before I go on, you got any good dad jokes you heard that you could share with us?
I'm not a big player in the dad joke group.
You mentioned asynchronous videos and how that works. First of all, what is it, and what's the functionality? And tell me about that.
Yeah. So I kind of learned this by trial by fire. So the pandemic hits and our employees had a lot of questions and they're worried about, okay, we have 30,000 clients. They have less employees. We get revenue by employees on the platform. What's going to happen to my job? Are you going to have to lay people off and so on and so forth? And, fortunately, we were able to grow our way through that, never laid anybody off. But those were questions in employees' minds. And so I started recording videos, literally kind of on my phone, 2-minute videos. And I would use our platform to send them out with a bit of text, right? And then in our platform, people were able to react, they were able to comment, they were able to ask questions. And I did that every week for the first 3 months, 2 to 3 videos a week of what's happening with the organization, what we're seeing to really try to manage the stress levels of people. And they could digest that anytime. They get a notification on their phone, they click on it, they see a video from me. When I meet an employee today, now coming up on a couple years later, the first thing they say to me every time is, hey, it's so good. I haven't seen you person to person in 18 months or 20 months. And thank you for doing all those videos. And so it allows you versus an email or some type of other communication, they can digest it when they want. We get the data of when people view these things. And you can see I can hit pretty much half of the workforce within one day with a video like that. And it trickles out. And so we take that same concept to meetings. And so we say to people, hey, why don't you record, the preamble to the meeting, which is often the first 15 or 20 minutes. And then so let's shorten the meeting and be able to use videos. Or follow-ups is probably the big thing, which is, okay, we've got 3 questions. We actually don't need to get 20 people on a Zoom call again. I'll answer these questions for you. I'll record a video. I'll send it out to you. And if you have questions, you can comment, react. I can answer them. And so I think it drives efficiency. It helps the Zoom fatigue, but it also creates more connection for broad-based communication when you've got a big group like over 4,000 people.
Don't you think that the way people are learning now matches up so much more with what you just said? I mean, there are people who want to learn how to assemble something. They go to YouTube to watch a video and someone talks them through the steps. Or if they're researching something, they'll Google it and there'll be a video that tells them something about it. I truly believe the way that we are learning as a society has evolved so much that what you just described is an efficient business tactic, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. as you think about Gen Z really entering the workforce, we've got a little under 4% of our workforce that are Generation Z. That's really the first completely digital generation where their first interactions on anything were done electronically, right? They're 5 years old and they've got an iPad in their hand or a phone or so on and so forth to play games and learn and connect. And so I think a lot of this was going to happen anyways as that generation started to become more and more of the workforce. What COVID did is accelerate all of us towards that trend where we now have to find different ways to learn. So sometimes writing, watching videos offline, searching and learning content on your own, sharing with friends and coworkers versus top-down communication. All of these things I think we're going to change, but I think COVID just really accelerated that trend. The challenge, though, is most companies weren't ready for that. And so to be able to actually scale, and I still think today there's so many things that we could do better to scale all of our internal processes, whether they're meetings or onboarding new hires or, training somebody, all of that has to change with that in mind, which is, wait, there's probably a better way to do these things if you think about it from a digital first perspective, and think about engagement, communication, collaboration, connection as being the outcome that we're trying to drive.
You referenced what COVID did. I wanted to go back to something that I intended to ask earlier, and it's about the acceleration of the future of work. And COVID has forced us to evolve in ways that we probably weren't expecting to until maybe later in the decade. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on that? And how do you hold on so it doesn't become a detriment to us down the road?
Yeah, I think there's lots of challenges there because when you go through massive change really quickly, you do have some unintended consequences, and it's tough for people to be able to keep up. But I do think if you have the perspective, we were going to be able to have to manage these trends long term anyways, then I think it does create a different perspective in terms of, okay, it's okay that I'm trying to catch up on some of these things. I would have conversations with customers, and we have video capabilities in our product. And the first thing a client would say pre-COVID is, I'm not recording myself on screen. And, by the way, like, I'm really nervous about that. And then I have to hit send. Oh my God, how many people is that going to? I'm really nervous about that. And so we've seen our video adoption grow probably, what I would have expected to be 5 to 7 years of adoption in really 12 months. With our customers, because they realized I didn't have a different way to do it. I had to do it. I am now used to being on Zoom. I don't mind recording myself and sending that out. And so that's just one example of how a trend can accelerate so quickly. And so my general advice of this is everybody's in the same situation. Jump in, dive into it. Try not to be afraid of it. Try something new. Get employees that are really comfortable to be able to kind of champion a different way to communicate and connect with each other. And it's hard to get started. It's hard to make that change. But once you start doing it, I think it can be a lot easier. And you learn faster because you're going to have to manage this one way or another anyways.
What are some of the worst unintended consequences that you think have happened? Because I kind of really want to push in on that, because everyone's trying to get a grip of what the COVID reality is going to be like for business. But can you share any things that you've seen that are, wow, that maybe is not the way that should have gone?
Sure. I think a lot of companies thought of, managing employees as a really important part of their business, as when they're in the office, when they're at work. And then it kind of ends there. Like, I've got to do the right things to be able to reward you and recognize you and train you and make sure that you're ready for the next job. But this blend of home life and work life, there was kind of a separation. And yes, I would talk to you about how your weekend was, and that was 2 minutes, and then it was over. Now, all of a sudden, you're in people's homes. There's kids walking by, and there's disruptions, and you kind of get a much better sense of what their life is. And then at the same time, like, the stresses of home and work are also blended. So I think that's been difficult for people. I think that's been a real challenge. And so then as businesses have to actually think, how do I balance that? Do I change people's schedules? So maybe I don't have Zoom call schedule when they're getting people on the bus or coming off the bus for kids. How do I manage the mental health aspect of Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call? And by the way, I'm kind of already in my home. And if there's stresses or just pressure I'm dealing with in everyday life, it's completely blended. I can say personally, on that drive home from work, I kind of leave work at work, I decompress, I get home, and now, okay, I got to reset. You don't have that time and ability to do that. So as much as you've lost the commute, oftentimes that blend, I think, definitely causes some challenges. And employers have to recognize it. They have to be comfortable talking about it, and they have to be able to adjust how they do things to make that stress more manageable for their teams.
Such a great observation, because you talk about the commute home and how you can recalibrate yourself for what you're going to face, because a baby in a diaper doesn't care about your Zoom call when they want to walk by in the background. As a CEO and a leader, then how do you keep your people motivated with under the circumstances that you just articulated? How do you keep them engaged when these stressors aren't separated?
Well, I would tell you the communication is it's always one of the most important things as a leader. It's even more important, and you've got to do it more frequently. Short, authentic, frequent bursts of communication is much more effective. And what I mean by that is different types of communication. Sometimes it's video, sometimes it's a written post, sometimes it's seeing you interact in a team meeting room group. We do thing right now every second week. We do an all hands meeting. It's half an hour. Anybody can get on, ask any questions that they want. There's no preparing for it. You're answering the questions live in real time. And people love that. They love the interaction, that it's not so prepared, that it's authentic, that it's real, it's short. And so that's what I would really focus on as a leader, is look at how you communicate with your employees, reimagine different ways, create a lot of variety. Because if I'm sitting there in front of my Zoom computer all day and there's only one way to digest this information, it's hard to stay engaged. And then also think about ways to engage at different levels. And what I mean by that is like messaging what's happening with the organization as a whole, making sure that they know what's happening, because they don't get to talk to people and the rumor mill doesn't work the same way. Then think about at their department and their team level, what's going on with their team, what's happening with other people, how are you doing team meetings? So I think communication is really the key to drive engagement, because I think most people, and if not everybody, wants to do a great job at work. They want to be able to advance. They start with the right intentions, and usually organizations don't do all the right things to bring those right intentions out. And so that would be my biggest recommendation: is re-examine all of your communication methods.
You know, our audience is business owners, people who are successful, those who are aspiring to that same end. You've learned a lot of lessons over the years. Share with us some of what you've learned as a CEO.
I think a CEO can be a challenging job because you are jumping from both one topic to the next constantly. Well, at the same time, sometimes you might be talking about, some bigger investment or big strategic change that you're driving, but then you're also talking about something really, really tactical, because you can kind of be the last stop where people go to for decisions. I think for me, I would really just focus on being who you are, being real, being empathetic, being truthful and direct in your communication is really critical. I think sometimes as a CEO, you get so busy with different items, you don't always spend the time to appreciate what it's like to be, one of the frontline folks who's talking to a customer or being in front of a prospect that you're selling. And so I think spending time with people and really being comfortable so that it does not feel prepared, it feels authentic and real. And when you do that, you're going to admit when you're wrong. You're going to be comfortable having a dialogue. You're going to be more comfortable listening to different perspectives. And I think sometimes there's a lot of pressure on the job, and because of that, when you get under pressure, it's harder to do those other things. And I think focusing on that is really important.
Have you maintained your own personal focus on this? We talked about replicating what a company does in other places and being able to keep that culture consistent for yourself over these years and building this into what it's become. How'd you stay so consistent?
We've gone through a lot of change. You can imagine going from 100 employees to over 4,000 employees and having the growth that we've had. I think there's lots of things you've got to do. Number one, you got to surround yourself with a great team, and you've got to make sure that the people around you have complementary skill sets to you. This is the whole magic. I want to hire somebody who's better at me at this, and then I want to hire somebody who's better at me at some other subject, and then be able to make sure that team, they operate culturally somewhat similarly. So you never want to have a leader that's a real cultural departure from the way the org is. And if you can do that, you basically are multiplying yourself, right? So now I've got 5 or 6 people who work for me. They hire 5 or 6 people who work for them, and culturally they operate the same way. And at the same time, they're better at individual things. And so, everyone always says hire great people is the answer, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because it's not just great people; it's people that do things better than you as a leader can do, and then trusting them and providing them the feedback to be able to grow and scale. For me, there's a lot of things I used to do that I never do before, right? When we had 100 employees, I'd walk around the office and I talked to every single employee and I knew them by name. Now I got to find other ways to be able to make those connections. But I can tell you the person who's leading a team of 100 people, I want them to do those same kind of things. And so it's that concept behind replicating culture over time. And then it makes it more manageable for me as a CEO as well, because I don't have to do everything myself, which is that the challenge that I hear from most leaders is the one that really weighs on you the most.
What do you think defines your leadership style? And because I'd love to hear more about that. I love what you just described, and I hope people catch it. You've got 100 employees. You'd go around and engage them. Now you've got nearly 4,100, so that's impossible. But you don't want to lose that connection between leadership and the people who are actually making the company go. So talk to me a little bit more about your leadership style, and then what do you think makes a good leader?
I think you've got to pick the values that are really important to you and then stand behind them. And they might be a little bit different based off your personality and the business that you're in. And so for us, one of our values as a company comes with the idea of live the reputation, walk the walk is what it really means. Say what you're actually going to do and then do it, and have a really high level of integrity. And that to me personally is one of my own personal values as well. And I've tried to make sure that the company operates that way. And what that does for me is it allows me to have really direct conversations, really transparent. People know that that's the way I'm going to be. But I also love it when people will challenge me and push back and equally have that direct conversation. And so it can create an open environment where it's not the person who's talking, it's the ideas and the facts and the information that you're exchanging that ultimately wins. For me, that's really, really kind of important. And I actually have to prioritize that over other things. So like being creative is really important, being innovative is important, constantly making change, these are all important values. But for me, that's the one that is the most important to me. I'm clear about what's most important to me. And then because I behave consistently that way, people know what to expect from me. And then I hire other people who've got, different types of skills and capabilities. I often find the leaders I'm trying to be the cheerleader at times. I'm trying to be the strategist. I'm trying to be, the best motivator. And so the reality is I can do a decent job at many of those things, but I probably can only do the best at one of those things. And so if a tough message needs to be delivered, or if we have to make a difficult decision, or if we need to be in front of employees and they need to ask tough questions, for me, my value of integrity means I'm the one who has to do that. I don't always necessarily have to be the one to roll out the newest idea or cheer on the recognition that we've had or market the success we've had. Sometimes I have to do those things, but that's where I go is my core thing is integrity, and it has to be a core value for us as a company.
Wow, so well said. What's your innovation process?
Yeah, innovation is obviously extremely important. In many ways, the examples I gave around, managing COVID are all kind of innovation examples on, micro scale. But at a macro level, you've really got to be able to listen to your clients and not only hear what they're saying, but hear the problem that they're trying to solve. Because oftentimes clients ask you for a specific request. If it's software, it's a feature. If it's, I'm in the restaurant industry, it's specific changes to a recipe or food or something I'm not enjoying or service experience. And they ask you specifically. But I think the key to innovation is to go back to that customer and say, well, what problem are you actually trying to solve? So you're asking me for something because you're not getting what you need out of it. What is it that you're ultimately trying to get what you need? Because I find to really try to innovate, you've got to look at the end-to-end experience that a customer has and not just make changes on the items that you're getting feedback. And so then what you do is you go back to other customers with that same problem. How are you handling that problem? How are we able to help you with that and solve with that? And then when you can innovate, you come up with ideas that solve all of these things. And I'll give you kind of a real-time example. In many cases, our customers came to us and said, one of the problems that I'm having is I've got diverse workforce. I am really trying to communicate and connect with them in different ways, and everything's gone mobile and they're not looking at my emails. I said, so at the end of the day, can you give me a more engaging email? Well, the answer wasn't a more engaging email. They needed something that would pop up on their phone. They could click on it and they would be able to interact with it because they actually wanted to know that people saw it. And then they wanted the analytics behind it. And so, like, as an example, that product has been a great accelerator for us during the pandemic, but we actually released it 3 years ago prior to the pandemic because we listened to the immediate ask that they had, but we didn't stop there. We went and figured out what the problem was, and then we created a bigger solve for that problem. And then we got much more adoption from our clients. And then the feedback keeps rolling in and it just gets better and better over time.
It's so interesting that you say that. I remember, Steve, when I was against wanting to have a smartphone way back when. I was a dinosaur, and I remembered not being able to get an email because I was using this Steam-driven model. And the next day, I went and got a BlackBerry because it's like anything that disrupts your ability to be productive during the workday is something you change. And so
Yeah.
I love that. What's the most important tool, or what are the most important tools and practices you think a company needs to have today outside of listening? You've talked about listening. What are some other things that companies should do?
That's a great question. I think beyond listening to your employees and customers, which I think I've emphasized several times, is you've really got to spend some time thinking ahead. And I think it's challenging for all leaders because in the moment, the problem of the day or the week of the month is really the number one problem. And I think we all fall into that at times. And so it's how do you spend some time thinking about what does this look like a year from now or 24 months from now or 36 months from now? And if you can find a way to think forward 2 or 3 years from now, it helps you reprioritize the things that you have in front of you. And so like another real-time example for us is, we have video in our product today, but we didn't put video in the product because of the pandemic. We had already been in the process of putting video in our product because we were thinking, wait, Generation Z is going to enter the workforce. They're completely digital. When you fast forward 5 to 7 years from now, they're going to want to communicate via video, not via text at a very basic level. So we started investments in that much, much earlier. That was accelerated by the pandemic, but that was all because we were trying to think of the future of work and what that would look 5 to 7 years from now. So no matter what your business is, whether you're going to be in the retail business or a restaurant business or a service oriented business, how could all the trends that are happening now change your business many years from now? And then how do you actually start initiatives small, learn from those over time, and prepare yourself for a different environment in the future? And I think that mindset has served us well.
Right now, everyone around the country is talking about how tight the talent pool is now. People are looking for talent and they're having a hard time getting it. What strategy would you recommend for companies trying to navigate that factor?
I'm going to try to simplify it and then add some context to it.
Okay.
You really got to think of why someone wants to come and work for you. And it's not for a paycheck, it's not for a job, and it's not to satisfy the basic needs. What are you offering that employee? And if you were an employee at that level of your career, what would you get excited about working for that company? And not enough companies actually they think about what is my pitch to the customer? Why do I tell a customer that they want to use us? So you need to reframe that and think about your employee as a customer and say, why would you actually want to come work here? And then secondly, what are the types of employees that have done the best? What's the background that they have? What do they love about the job that they're in? The people that are happiest, what do they really enjoy? And then you got to think about, I got to market very much to employees like I would to customers. And maybe not every employee is going to be the perfect fit for me, just like not every customer might use my service. But that whole HR function has become very marketing oriented in a tight labor market. And so you hear terms like an employee value proposition and some fancy terms, but the reality is it's just what is your sales pitch to an employee about why they want to be able to work for you. And if you don't know what that is and you can't do it in a handful of sentences really succinctly, that's what I would kind of go back to. And then make sure that the managers who are interviewing these employees and that first contact, if it's a recruiter, if it's a manager, if it's a store owner, like that pitch has to be practiced just like you would practice a sales pitch. And you've got to make sure that that it's really engaging with the employees. A lot of companies are used to employees just applying and you pick the best one that you've got. That's just not the world anymore. And I don't think that's going to be the world for a while, quite frankly.
I love the energy. Love the energy. Final question here. If you could recommend one or two actions that a company can do right now to improve the workplace, what would those suggestions be?
So I think the first thing I would do if you're a leader and you could be a leader of a large group and managing a location, or you could be a CEO, increase the frequency of your communication. That would be the number one thing that I would do. I used to prepare quarterly meetings. It would take hours of preparation. I would do PowerPoints. We'd launch it to thousands of people. We'd be ready to see what the questions are. And now all I do is I do a half-hour Q&A every 2 weeks, and then I record some videos. And it's less on my time. It's way more appreciated by my employees. And I can pick topics that help drive the culture or drive what our key initiatives are, And that would be number one to me. And then number two would be find ways to collect more feedback from the employees. Because of COVID, we started surveying our employees much more frequently, and actually sometimes surveying them on decisions we were going to make. So we're planning on returning to work a couple months from now. What do you guys think? And we would get feedback and comments, and then we would then say, okay, here's what our plan is, and it was all based off employee feedback. So communicate, high frequency, shorter, gather feedback, whether that's survey tools, roundtables, discussion groups. I think that's key in this kind of environment.
You know, that answer was so good. I said the last question was the last one, but I'm going to ask one more. I'm going to sneak it in there. For if there is a CEO watching right now, someone who's online watching you, listening to your story and everything you've said, and they're kind of at their wits' end, as you can be in business sometimes, and they're teetering on staying with it or doing something else, what would be your encouragement to them to stay with it?
Well, we've had quite the journey at Paylocity. And I can remember there were times where we only had 2 or 3 payrolls left to cash. We were trying to expand nationally, and we hadn't experienced doing that. And we tried new things, building into product areas we haven't gone before. And the first version of that doesn't work the way you want. I think the cycle of small failures is just part of success over time. And so the way my encouragement is, it's okay to have those small kind of events. It's about as a CEO, it's about being able to quickly cycle through what happened that got you there and then move your vision forward and then start putting a plan for success. You never want to stall. Like, movement forward to me is always kind of the key with that. And just not dwelling on why we got there, understanding it, learning from it, and moving forward. And then just kind of, as the leader, you've got to do that with a fair amount of confidence so that you can then bring the team along with you. Because sometimes what seems impossible in the moment over time becomes much more possible as you start executing that plan. And I think having that confidence that that will happen is also an important element.
Time indeed becomes a weapon the longer you live, does it not?
Good way to say
Steve,
it.
thank you so much. This has been fantastic, man. So much great information, so much energy, and this. I hope that this has been as engaging for you as it has been for me. I've enjoyed the insight that you've given.
Great, really appreciate your time. Thank you, Clay.
I'd also like to thank all of you, our guests, for joining us this morning, and thank our sponsors for making this episode possible. We'll see you next month.